Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Are you in the market trying to find your first fountain pen within $20? So keep watching because in this video we'll be discussing through examples from my collection of over the last 10 plus years, top questions, top considerations that you should be having so that you can nail it the first time. Because if you do not make the right choice, then you'll end up with a fountain pen that you ultimately do not like. Keep watching. Hello friends, welcome back. So the top three questions we'll be asking today to help you in your selection are as follows. Number one, the reliability of a fountain pen. Number two, the look and feel, the balance, the build quality, and those aspects. Some are aesthetics in nature, some are functional, but that whole group of questions we will also be asking. And third, we'll be asking what I call the inky characteristics of a fountain pen, things such as the filling system, the nibs, and all of that aspects. So through these key areas, we'll be figuring out what's the best way to find a fountain pen that's best suited for you. And then we'll end with some final thoughts. Now, as we move forward, I'd like to remind you that please subscribe to this channel if you're interested to hear more stories like this, to hear more fountain pen reviews, ink reviews, comparing fountain pens, and any and all of these aspects of fountain pens that I'll be releasing soon. So continue watching, and when you have a chance, please subscribe. Since this is going to be your first pen or one of your initial pens, reliability should be one of your top considerations in selecting a fountain pen. Now, what is reliability in context of a pen? In my opinion, it is the consistency at which a pen writes each time and every time. No hard start, no skips, no ink starvation, no baby's bottom, no scratchy nib, no, none of those. And again, I'm not talking about my personal preferences here, whether the nibs should write a little more on the wetter side or on the drier side, how polished the nib should be, a tiny bit of feedback. None of those I'm talking about. I'm talking about just basic functional aspects that a pen, a reliable pen, should pass in flying colors. Unfortunately, though, that's not always the case. That's why research is important. More so because for a budget pen, you don't want to spend cycles on warranty services, do you? On top of it, a lot of reliability issues show up after a few months of writing, when very likely the return period is already over. For example, this Jinhao X750, when I bought, it was working perfectly fine and I was quite happy with it actually. It was a reasonable price pen. I think I paid about $7 or so. Looks sturdy. It's good. But then it stopped working. The ink was not filling in. It was skipping. I was not sure what's going on. I tried something. It did not work. But after a few tries, I cleaned it thoroughly again. It started working back again now and without much of a problem. At least for last couple of days I've been trying. Now, that's a good news, but will I call it a reliable pen for me? No. Now, I should not generalize this brand saying this brand is not reliable. That's not a point. This is only a specific example in my case. However, the point is that you should try to see what most of the other people's experiences have been. Check online forums such as Reddit. Ask questions on Fountain Pen Network if you are not sure. Do your research and try your best to see that at least that pen which you are considering buying, does it have a pretty bad reputation in its reliability or not? Because trust me, no matter how fancy the pen looks and writes, if it is not reliable as your first pen, you will be upset because you do not have hundreds of pens in your collection that okay, if a few pens are not reliable, who cares? That's not your case, because we are talking about a first or maybe second fountain pen. Now if you ask me which brands, at least in my experience, I have found reasonably reliable, I would like to give a shout out to at least two brands. That's again my personal experience, but if you do your research, probably you'll find similar opinion across the board. Pilot and Platinum. These are the two brands I'm talking about. Both I have their low-end pen, I have their very high-end pen, I have the Namiki pen from the Pilot series, over $1,000 pen, all across the board. They really work fantastic. And even a Platinum Preppy, for example, a $5 pen is so awesome. So my recommendation, as your starting pen, as your budget friendly initial pen, do not go into unknown brands yet. You will have plenty of opportunities to try those. Do not get into any fancy stuff yet. Stick to basics, stick to trusted, reputable brands. Let's talk about fountain pen aesthetics, including feel and balance. So at this point, you have already narrowed down to a few brands based on reliability that we discussed. The next thing you may want to focus is what I call the fountain pen aesthetics. Under this area comes properties such as design, look and feel, material, color, size, weight, beauty, style, all of that. Basically things that, strictly speaking, does not affect the writing quality of a pen, but aesthetically appeal you. This is mostly a personal preference question, but let's talk about some of the key points, particularly ones that have some impact on your writing experience. We'll talk about three key areas here. One is the material, another is the size, and another is the weight and balance. Material. If you want to use the pen in a relatively rough environment, such as school or factory floor, you may want a metal body pen or metal coated pen. For example, from this group of pens, I'd choose the Lamy All-Star or this Jinhao X750 purely based on their sturdiness. Material plays a role in durability, so worth keeping in mind. Next, let's talk about the size. A simple rule of thumb: large hand, larger medium-sized pen, and small hand, smaller medium-sized pen. Now, two specifically dimensions are important. One is the section width. Section width meaning the width, the diameter of the area where you hold the pen close to the nib. I recommend stay between 8 to 11 millimeter section, unless you have quite a small or quite a large hand. Now, small hand, large hand, you pretty much can probably gauge based on the glove size you wear. So if you are wearing a small size glove, then you have a small hand versus larger, extra large glove size, you have a large hand. And between male and female, that obviously shifts by one factor of one, I'd say. So a medium, a male hand may be a large female hand, like that. So what I'm talking about in context of the male hand size, but you can adjust based on whether you are a man or a woman. So as I said, try to pick one between 8 to 11 millimeter section size, unless you are absolutely certain why you are not selecting that size. And when buying the pen or doing your research, use websites such as GouletPen, ChetPen, Snibs.com, because they list the specs of the fountain pen, in which you can see easily the section size. You can also watch YouTube videos. A lot of people who publish videos, they also specify the specs either on the videos or on their website, so that could be a good resource for you. The next within size is the length of the pen. Again, it's the same rule of thumb: large hand, large pen, and like that, which you just talked about. But one important factor here is the question whether you like to write a pen posted versus not posted. Posted meaning you put the cap at the back of the pen. So if you like posted, you have to measure the length based on the posted length. Again, keep in mind one thing, that not all pens are postable. So that is also you have to be careful about, because if you like posted and the pen you buy may not be posting very well. So you keep that in mind. Now from a general guidance standpoint, from my personal opinion, 130 millimeter to 160 millimeter of a length of writing, meaning if it is, if you like posted, then it's the posted length I'm talking about. If you like unposted, then I'm talking about the unposted length. So that length, if you are within 130 to 160 millimeter, you'll be probably doing fine. That fits more or less the average sized hand. Even a large hand can be fine with it. Even a little small hand can be fine with that range. But if you go beyond this, meaning either on the higher level or on the lower level, make sure your hand size, matches with particular that length. Let's move on to weight. This is obviously quite a personal thing. But if you're not sure, I'd say rather stay on the lighter side. Pens can be as light as 10 grams or even as heavy as 100 grams or more. Pilot Kakuno with about 12 grams work quite fine for me actually, with a smallish medium hand that I have. Now some people do like heavier pens, so if you are on that category, that's perfectly fine, but make sure you know what you like, and if you are not sure, stay on the lighter side. What is light? Anything in the 10 grams to 15, 16 grams, I'd call it light. Ultimately, what matters even more, I think, is the balance of the pen at hand. Balance is a combination of length, weight, thickness, size of your hand, and the equation can suddenly change if you post your pen that does not post deep enough. Without a good balance, your nib won't naturally stay on paper, which means you'll have to keep forcing the nib to stay on paper, which ultimately will tire your hands. You have to be careful. Now let's talk about the nib size and the filling systems, collectively what I call the inky factors of a fountain pen. The nib width, also called the line width, is basically how thin or thick a line a pen writes. There is no universal standard here, but line width keeps increasing from extra fine to medium and so on. Usually the line width is a personal preference, but keep a few things in mind. If your handwriting is small, that is, you write small sized letters, you better not go wider than medium, in my opinion, as otherwise your O's and B's and P's will become just a blob of ink. Particularly if you're a student and need to write, for example, mathematical equations and other things that requires tiny letters, you may even consider an extra fine, or definitely not more than a fine sized nib. Another thing to keep in mind is that the nibs coming from Asian countries usually run a notch finer than rest of the world. I know this is perhaps too much to digest and analyze, so if you are not exactly sure, my recommendation, go with a fine nib, because fine nib is something you really cannot go wrong with. Later, once you sort of figure out what line width suits your need most, you can always either change the nib to another nib size or buy your second or third pen with a different nib size. Now let's talk about filling systems. This is something I would say that not too much to worry, at least initially. There are quite a few options out there. You can have an eyedropper fill system, a piston filling system, cartridge converter system. I'd say once you have nailed down a particular pen that you like and the nib size and all of that matches to your taste, take the filling system that the pen comes with. Don't worry too much. But if you have an option, like you have say shortlisted 2 pens and the only delta between the two is filling system, then I'd say that choose the cartridge one only because for your initial pen cartridge you may be finding it a little easier to deal with. Some final thoughts before we end, friends. When you buy a pen, I suggest you also think a little in advance what you may need as supplies. For one, you will need ink, of course. My recommendation is that you invest some money in buying an ink sampler instead of buying ink bottles, because with an ink sampler you can really experience the magic of different kind of ink at a reasonable budget. Goatpens and other stores offer these samplers. If you do not have a converter coming with your pen, you need to either order one or you can simply reuse the empty cartridges. That's fine with a syringe. Or you can keep it simple by buying just a pack of ink cartridges. That's okay too. Depending on your budget, another thing I think you may want to invest a little bit money on, which is paper supplies. Buy some fountain pen friendly paper if you can, such as Rhodia pads or Tomo River notebooks. If you're in school and on tight budget, I understand that you may not be able to switch to a very expensive paper supplies for your schoolwork. And I don't think you need to spend money on those expensive paper yet anyways. But buy just one small pad or a few sheets of good paper to use as reference. Say you have an ink bleeding through your cheap paper and you're wondering, is it the pen, writing too wet, or it is just the paper? You can always check writing on your reference few sheets of paper that you have bought just to confirm that, hey, I mean, this is clearly a paper issue because the reference paper is working just fine. And finally, I'd say that join the online forums that exist today if you can, because Reddit, Fountain Pen Network, there are over 150,000 people are already members, and those helps are readily available to you if you want or if you need. And above all, have fun, guys, writing with your fountain pens. That's all we want.